Good afternoon or morning to everyone on the call here. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. If you're here for methodology for successful AP automation approach, you're in the right spot. We will get started at 2 o'clock Eastern time. All right. I think we are ready to roll. I see some folks still obviously logging in, but they can sort of miss the beginning here. Thank you and welcome to the webinar here. My name is Ken Anderson. I'm with IntelliChief. And what we're going to do here is sort of look at the methodology we use to implement a successful AP automation project and some of the things you can do sort of on your own or start to think about if you have this as a project coming up in the next year or two and really start gathering the kind of things that whomever you choose in terms of a vendor, or if you do it on your own program, some of the things you're going to want to know to be able to ensure that it's successful. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So this is going to be a little bit over the 30-minute. I know we said 30 minutes, but that's okay. I can stick around. If anyone has any questions, or just go ahead and type them on the right-hand side, and we'll get them answered at the end, or wait till the end. It's totally up to you. So our agenda is talk quickly about who we are, what we do out there in the space, why we think we are qualified to even talk about this topic if you don't know us. Then we're going to dive really quickly into automating the AP process, looking at the goals and what we would call the business design. Talk a little bit about creating a business case, what goes into that, next steps, questions, etc. So, this is an abridged version of what we call the 7 steps to implementation. It's a process that we use internally to ensure that these types of projects, we use it on sales order processing and human resources implementations, etc. So you can kind of get the gist. So who are we? Well, the first question that always comes up is, we call it IntelliChief. Where'd you get that? Right? What's that name come from? Well, it actually originates from Intelligence for Chief Executives. That's how IntelliChief started. So it's kind of a interesting when we were trying to come up with a name, a decade ago or so. That was how we arrived at it. So what is IntelliChief? So I know there is a couple folks on the call here today that use IntelliChief for various things. So really quickly, what IntelliChief is it's truly an enterprise content management system, or ECM system. So you may use it only in AP today or in sales order processing, or maybe you just use it to store documents and retrieve them. All of those things make up what is considered an ECM system. So IntelliChief is typically implemented in one area to start with, and then it usually grows throughout the other areas within the organization that the customer needs to use it, if you will. So that could be, beginning in AP and reading invoices and creating vouchers, all that good stuff that we're going to talk about today. Or you could be using it for processing customer POs and want to move into AP. But the concept is that you only need one of these tools, one of these IntelliChief tools, to be able to expand into your organization. So that's what we are. We're an ECM system. So who are we? We're out here in beautiful Tampa, Florida is our world headquarters. North American headquarters is in Mansfield, Massachusetts, just outside Boston, which is our old world headquarters, if you will. Unfortunately, I was one of the folks that moved here to sunny Florida. We got a ton of customers out there. We really focus on the concept of best practices in terms of specific business processes, procure to pay, AP automation, sales order processing, etc. Those are our, that's really what we kind of focus on as an organization. And so here's some of the folks who use our tool out there for all different various things. And I call it our software company logo slide you sort of have to have. So from very large distributors like Beacon Roofing to, Herc Reynolds, down to very small organizations that we fit sort of across the board, if you will. All right, so let's get into meat and potatoes, which is AP automation. And this is what we really, the idea behind this is to kind of open the kimono and give you the tools you need to be able to start to plan, or if you're already in the throes of an AP automation project, really to look at it from the way that we do to ensure there's it's definitely going to be a success. So what we use to do this is what we call the 7 steps, okay? And it starts with what's called the business design. I'm going to go through this, but the first one is understanding the problem, right? Why are we even looking at this thing? The second one is to identify the goals and requirements, and I'm going to give some examples along the way here, to look at what is the current process and really map that to understand it, right? Because it's, and I'll show a couple real life examples here that we use with customers where, the process may be slightly different than you think it is, particularly if you're in a management position over it, and things over time have evolved to deal with business situations on the ground, so to speak. That's why it's important to really have a good understanding of how the current process works. Forget about AP automation and software and all that stuff. How does it work today? Then we turn around and say, okay, let's design how we would like it to work, right? And if we design it that way, what is the ROI associated with this? Or what's our justification for looking at this? And again, this is, to make this a successful project. Turn around, document that, and present it so we're all on the same page in terms of what it is we're going to implement. And then finally, at the end of that, that's where you start talking about software and technical pieces and what server to use and all that good stuff, right? That's your technical design that says, okay, we know how we want it to work. Let's now make it work that way, right? So understanding the problem, right? And this is going to turn into our goals. So it's not, I'm not putting this out there because, we know there's a problem, right? You just have that, I got a problem in AP, but we got to really start to put our hands or our finger on what exactly is it, right? And so here's some of the questions you can use. And if you ever call us and talk to us about this, you'll hear a lot of this same stuff. In fact, we have a whole thing that we go through, particularly in AP, about how it works now. So one of those is how many invoices match now. So if we're doing PO matching, right, a 2 or 3-way match or more, what does it look like before you have a solution, right? Because our goal is probably going to get to how do I get these straight through, right, without user intervention. And if none of my stuff matches today, right, your user has to go to purchasing and get the PO fix every single time. We're never going to get straight through processing until we deal with that. So how many match today, right, and why? Excuse me. How much time do I spend keying, right, in hours? Is that all I do? My users are sitting there keying invoices all day. Do I care about early pay discounts? Do I leave those on the table? A lot of, AP folks that I talk to, and certainly controllers and what have you, they have an understanding, probably look at this in a spreadsheet. Have I documented the existing process? How much of my AP time is spent chasing approvals, right? Those folks who are the quote, problem approvers, or if you do remote coding, have your people in the field code invoices. Are your people having to chase down those approvers and or, PMs coding invoices in the field? Can I eliminate tribal knowledge? Ken knows that, XYZ supplier does it this way. Well, that's going to be, tribal knowledge is tough for a lot of reasons. One, it's hard to get a new person to be able to take care of that. But if Joe always processes a certain vendor's type of invoices because they're really complex or something like that, we got to understand what makes them complex and how do we simplify that. And of course, manual matching, right? If you're doing manual match, I got to go check if things are received after I key it or any of those kind of things, right? These are some of the questions you want to start looking at the business process to really understand why it's a problem, what's taking the time. And I know a lot of people use received not vouchered as a measurement. So if you're not measuring that, or maybe it doesn't matter, but if it does matter, right, that's a way to determine, hey, what's the effectiveness here? So these are just examples. And of course, you know, we would typically, well, I'll talk about our approach, but this is what we're trying to understand to say, okay, well, how do I determine ultimately what's going to make this a success when it's done, right? So now we know what the problem is. Let's identify the goals and requirements around that. So I'm going to give some examples here. I was just telling a colleague that I was on a call literally this morning, and the goal of the customer, they could care about anything I'm going to put up here. It was, I want 60% straight through processing on invoices. And that's okay. So some of these goals can be mushy, right? But some of them really have to be defined so we know, because these are ultimately going to go out into the critical success factor to determine if this was in fact a success. And these goals are different for everybody, right? If I'm a customer, if I'm an AP, shared services center, and none of my stuff matches today, I'm not really getting, straight through processing isn't going to be my measure of a success right now. It's going to be, how do I improve my match process? So I'm just going to give some examples that we've seen out there. Eliminate having to do manual data entry, obviously a good one. Eliminate errors associated with data entry. Recognize 90% of early pay discounts as an example. Some people, again, they could care less about early pay discounts. Others negotiate, AP negotiates that, particularly distributors, with the supplier up front if they know they can pay them in time so that they can take it as a discount. Duplicate payments, eliminate 90%. Again, just examples, 40% straight through processing. And while I'm here, straight through processing, for folks that don't know, is an invoice comes in, the system reads it, performs its match, and automatically creates the voucher without end user intervention. That's what the term touchless or straight through processing means. And that's typically a pretty important goal of an AP implementation. Maybe not, but most of the time it's going to come up. Automate in the process so that users only have to focus on exceptions, right? When the line on the invoice doesn't match the PO or something like that. So we want them, that's a more of a mushy or a squishy goal, if you will. Increase invoice volume by 20% and eliminate overtime. This is one that we pulled, right from a customer. Yours don't have to be these, by the way. They could be totally different. And receive not voucher reduced in days by 30%. So just some examples of, things you want to get. Again, the goals are important to share with somebody like us, because in our case, we put it right into what becomes our statement of work and ultimately our delivery vehicle, so that we can determine whether this was a success or not. Because if you care about straight through processing and we care about, how non-PO invoice MRO approval or something, then we have a mismatch and you're going to be unhappy at the end. So we've got to make sure that the goals are in line with the person doing the project, if you will. So now we want to, again, go back and map the current process. So let me give you an example. So this was one that it's a funny story. This is actually a really old one, but where someone had sent us or told us that the process worked like this. And it's very simple, right? AP receives, they make a copy, send it to an approver, whatever. And that was the view of how the process worked. Well, just for, inventory and non-PO, and this, by the way, keeps going. This is just an example of one type of invoice, or two types of invoices, rather. It becomes much more complex once we start digging in and really determining what really happens in the field. So that's why it's important to really document how it works today. And things will jump out at you, right? And that you maybe didn't know or didn't know why we did something. They're going to start to jump out. And this is one of the things our AEXs do in the field is say, just show me how it works today, right? And ask a lot of questions and whiteboard the process. So how to identify that? what's important in terms of AP automation, points of origins, excuse me, of where things come into your organization, right? So a PO is generated by purchasing. How does that get into AP? Well, obviously it's generated by the ERP and captured, and we can read that table, but an invoice might come in. So you may have one of your suppliers send them in via fax, or maybe it's hundreds of them do that. That's one of the things you want to know. Decisions, right, where somebody manually or interactively decides something, like all vendors that go A through C go to Ken, right? That's a decision in terms of how we distribute them, and then ultimately where it ends. Mapping that process, not just the task, the whole process, everyone involved, right? Users, because if Jim only comes in on Fridays and he always does the ones for, pick a XYZ company, Jim's got to give us some feedback so that we understand when an exception comes up, we can build for it. Potential user issues, right? If someone's writing on something and that's not captured anywhere other than in their head, that's a user issue, and it's going to cause things to stop and not get our straight-through processing rate. Integration points with the core ERP or core application, your financial application. Obviously, reading the PO table, your vendor master, reading the receipt table to know when something's received to do a match. But it could also be things like item master, right? And, ensuring that a part number is there, or conversion. So all the parts where it touches with your core ERP system. Now, in our case, we do a lot of these, right? So folks, maybe don't know, particularly if it's outside the department, we will find all that out for you because we need to in order to be able to, automate the process. Document related as well as activity related tasks, things people have to do. So an activity related task might be your user gets an invoice and they have to check if things are received, right? Depends on the ERP how that works, but what are the tasks? Maybe they stick them in a thing in their desk and wait till everything's received, or after 7 days they do something. Those kind of tasks. Problem areas, opportunity areas. Ken gets all the invoices that are 500 lines. That's an opportunity area, right? So create the flow for AP, or if you're doing sales order process, you can use those things as an example, as a template. Some things to help out. Functional areas first, and the activities that happen there, right? Purchasing goes in, creates a vendor, and if you've been in the, had moved through the AP process, you probably already know some of this stuff anyway. All those activities we talked about, especially exceptions, and there's always exceptions, right? So I mentioned a couple of bills here on Friday, whatever those are for you, what are they, so we can get those as part of the documentation so we understand how it works. All of us. Are all vendors and or invoices handled the same way? It's a blanket one versus, invoice for inventory. How do you code tax, freight, other charges, right? Most likely, if you're not doing AP automation today, you probably, the user keys it in at the time that they key the invoice, but is there a different way that might work in your case? If you're a construction company, for example, the PM has to do that, right? So those kinds of things. How many people are involved in every piece of that process? And then the same for all locations. If you are not shared services or centrally located, maybe you're an organization that has multiple locations out there, and we just acquired Bob's Paint Store company, and they do it totally different than us, but at the end it rolls up in my ERP. That's the kind of thing you want to know. So now we have the process down, right? We can now design the solution. Now, this is a good starting point, right? We now know the problem. We got our goals down. We got how it works today. Now we're looking at exploring different scenarios to solve the problems identified. Now, I'll tell you, if you come to us and you have all those things done, we're going to be really excited, because that means, it's really easy for us to dive in with the best practices approach. So validate that with the users, right? That this will in fact work with the way they think. technology required. So if you have multiple ERPs, multiple systems, if there's going to be any IT assistance required, because again, I'm looking at this right now from the perspective I'm in, AP, and I'm trying to improve that. Maybe you're in IT and trying to improve that. Depends on the organization. Any changes to the business process, rules, things that you couldn't wait to get rid of, now you can, right? I can put all the approval levels into a table and have the system decide on a non-PO who approves it and when, and you don't have to deal with that anymore. Prioritizing the implementation plan, right? Schedule review of the design with your team, right? So you're with the executive management team, particularly, or whoever your sponsor is, or if you're the sponsor, make sure that you're reviewing it with the rest of the team, that the design is in line with what you're trying to accomplish, right? Because at the end, we got to make sure we're all on the same page. So here's just some considerations that, if you're on this, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, and frankly, most of you probably know what some of these things are. But I'll pick a couple out. You can review this after, but you're to measure issues, ordering parts for supplier part numbers, copying, filing, those kinds of things. And here's even a whole bunch more. If you were to call us, or if you have called us and are in a project with us right now, we went through basically all of this stuff, right? With you in terms of talking to you, because we're trying to understand what the effort required to implement this is. Okay, so the discovery, right? So now we have all that information. So what we do here is, now when you start, I guess this is sort of our approach, but when you're starting to work with vendors, right, is how do you communicate this information that we've gathered to ensure that we have a successful implementation of this type of tool? So we look at even our AEXs or our sales team, right? They're going to begin with what is the current process, right? Because what do you want to solve? Without that context and understanding what you as a customer need to have to call this a success, it's very difficult to advise you on the solution at all. And, so it sometimes we'll get folks who'll call and say, we want to do AP automation. How much is it? Well, it's totally dependent on those things that you've now figured out are the problem. Why is it dependent on that? Because if you come in and say, everything matches, we use a three-way match, we're not doing anything without a PO, that's a very different scenario than I've got 500 locations out there or PMs in the field, and they all need to geocode and approve based on a really complicated approval matrix and so forth. So that's why it's important. So what our folks will do is typically start with that. They're going to review those business processes with you. And if you've already done all that upfront stuff, you're in really good shape, right, to outline the desired outcomes. Now, we as a vendor can say, let's build this solution that does that, and let's ensure that it meets the goals and has the return on investment that you need to effectively get this whole thing presented to your team and approved and all that good stuff. So once you determine that, now you have a vendor like us, hopefully us, right, to help develop that implementation plan. So set the metrics, goal, timelines, all that good stuff. So again, our we do this all the time. So, and here's a Infor customer out there, Teledyne Controls. They were surprised because they've been looking at multiple vendors. We come out to the office and whiteboard the whole thing, right? They said, okay, they want to understand why it worked. So find somebody like that who understands or learns the business, how your business works and why it works that way. It's not the same. AP is not the same for a construction company or a project accounting type approach than it is for a discrete manufacturer or a someone who buys raw materials, maybe a process manufacturer. It's very different. So understanding that is good. Identify some subject matter experts on your side that really get the whole process, and of course, a vendor that develops that plan with you, right? So now we got all that, let's look at calculating the return on investment. So where's the return on investment come from? It's really you did 90% of it when you were figuring out what the problem was and stating the goals, right? So here's just an example. A manual AP is 16 and a half days to process an invoice. Somebody who's automated is in this example only going to take 2.9 days. Well, what does that equal in terms of actual cost to my organization if I don't do something, right? What's the justification? Well, in this example, it went from 1667 down to 334 to process an invoice, right? And ultimately, the other side, one of the other pieces to the ROI was 20% of early pay discounts were taken versus 90 once they were able to get in AP automation operational. So areas to look for savings, right? Legal mandates. Hopefully you don't have regulatory compliance issues. Sarbanes-Oxley. We've worked with folks who had requirements to meet ATF requirements. Whatever those are for you. That's a great place to look for savings because it usually means audit costs, all that good stuff. Offsite storage, if you're paying that, labor reductions or additional labor required in the future. My organization's growing by 20% per year. We just acquired 2 companies and want to build a shared services. So, employee retention, right? I got a customer who has 26 accounts payable people in keying keying invoices into an ERP system all day long. That's all they did. And unfortunately, they would do that for about 6 months and there was turnover. So, because it's a thankless job. And if some of the folks on the call are doing that job, you know what I mean by that. So employee retention, put the folks dealing with errors or issues that only they can solve versus just, keying stuff. Manual matching, depending on how your ERP works, this could be a real bear, right? I got one ERP that we've worked with a lot that requires the user to enter the invoice before they can determine if it's been received. So it's just ridiculous. And they got to back out on that, before it posts, and then put that invoice on a box on the desk and wait, then key it in again to find out. If you're doing stuff like that, please call me immediately. Access to documents, obviously during this whole thing, you don't have to FedEx, fax, whatever, amongst locations, divisions, people, you have access directly from your core system. Eliminate keying for using OCR and capture. Cross-filing, people having to file stuff in receiving and AP, etc. And I'll just go through real quick a bunch of the other ones. So those are some of your areas where you look for savings. This is all ultimately going to go into our justification as to why we're doing that. Look, if at the end of this doesn't equal the cost to implement the tool, then you shouldn't be doing it, right? It's a waste of time to continue looking at. But now you know. So here's some other ones. I'm just going to bring them all up real quick so you can kind of see those because I know we're getting towards time. But these are some of the things you want to think about, right? And this isn't all, right? This is dependent on you and how you do it. So calculating the ROI, right? So here's some of the stuff you need to do that. Now that we've got all the different things we do, the number of those you plan to do in the next 5 years, look for growth, right? If I'm growing as an organization, that means volume. Increase in headcount if you have to hire more people to deal with that. Decrease in headcount over the next, if you're automating this and you don't expect to add. And, some of the other things. Are you investing in additional stuff later? Are you doing a phased approach? Well, first I want to just get all my document storage issues out of the way and use this ECM tool to store and retrieve content and share. Then later I'm going to implement AP automation. You can do all that, but those are things that you want to think about in your return on investment so you can calculate what the justification is. And then things like maintenance, if you have that, or whether you have to upgrade this for some reason in the next 5 years. So just some of the things that go into calculating your justification or return on investment. Hard savings, and by the way, I'll talk about it at the end, but we have a tool that helps do all this stuff. Your hard savings are going to be, and this is probably when you're going to go to your CFO and they want to forget about all the mush. I want to see hard savings, right? things like reduction in hiring, operating costs, very specific costs that go away. I don't have to print things. I don't have to store stuff. I don't have, I'm not going to hire 2 more people, whatever that thing is. Soft savings, customer service if we're on the, sales order side, or, employee satisfaction because they're not, not turning people over every 6 months. Faster access, faster internal communications, and there's honestly a million of both of these in there. So we do have an ROI calculator we can walk you through. It's sort of complex, and it makes you really think about how the process works. So it's not something where just, I send you and it's going to make perfect sense how you do it. It really goes into the, value of money and all that good stuff, and you really have to go kind of dig through how your business process works. And then it's going to give you a real solid ROI, but it's out there to use. And so the business case that you're then going to present to your team, or you're going to have your team present to you, is going to have these pieces, right? Summary, what's the goals, all the stuff we talked about up to this point. What's my current process? What am I going to implement? What are the benefits going to be, and the justification ultimately now over time? How the vendor you choose, what's their implementation methodology, what we have to have technology-wise, all that good stuff. This is your business case that you turn around and so your team is presenting you to get this approved so you can determine if it's justified, or if you're trying to justify this is the approach you want to take here. So now we're at the technical design, right? So how that's going to work. I want to scan paper, store them, automatically import email stuff. Some of the features that are out there. I want to capture data off of an invoice and validate it against what's in my ERP system. This is where you get into all the little details now about that you've collected up to now to determine whether the tools you're looking at can do it. I want to capture and code special charges, automate 2- and 3-way match on the PO side, route expense invoices for coding, approval, exception handling, what to do if something's doesn't match, or somebody doesn't approve within X amount of time. Integrate that approval and geocoding with mobile. Maybe you have people in the field that you need to have mobile access. This is where you're starting to now you're prepared to have a discussion about what the technical aspects of this thing are, and whether you need them or not. And ultimately, do I want to create the voucher in my ERP system? Is there integration to do that? Or how am I going to do that? And provide process visibility. So, my received voucher was 8 days, or however you measure that. What is it now, right? And how can I check that on a consistent basis? So from a technical design standpoint, or now we're getting into the implementation side, this is our approach. We assign a project manager, installation engineer, and sometimes these are the same people, but this tells you what they do. The designer, they go in and validate that everything we learned from our business design earlier can be done, and in fact is, they might have a better way. And ultimately, your implementation person who implements it, a test engineer who grabs all your, top 10 vendors and runs them all through and tests to make sure everything works and creates the voucher in the system before you do. And then ultimately a trainer who teaches you and or your team how to use the solution that you've now implemented. So I don't want to get into gory detail about the implementation process, but as I talked about the 7 steps of a business design, or how to look at from our business, we also do, take that same sort of defined approach to the implementation process, right? And so really, going through a regimented how to implement something so that it meets the business requirements. So when you're talking to a vendor, you want to ensure that you have an understanding of what that process looks like, and that it feels right, that it's going to work, so to speak. So that's a lot of stuff, but let's jump into some of the key considerations that you want to take a look at. So am I looking at an AP only type solution, right? Because we've been talking about AP a lot here versus enterprise, right? Do you need real-time integration? So these are some of the things out in the space that you'll hear as buzzwords as you're looking into these things. So is real-time important to me? For example, real-time means that it's reading the data that is in your ERP system from, like, for example, receiving, so that it doesn't try to do a match until something's received. And it does that in real time versus I do an update. So that's what that means. The implementation methodology we talked about. What do you get after the sale with the different vendors you're looking at, right? Because let me tell you, if you're implementing this type of system that we've talked about today, and or even in sales orders, et cetera, it becomes mission critical to your organization. Like, if I can't pay my, really solid suppliers, or I can't do it because there's some problem that I can't fix, that's going to be a problem that it hurts the business from, particularly on orders, but definitely on AP as well. So how do you get help when things don't work as expected? Because this is going to happen to all, implementations of everything. I don't care if it's Windows, right? So I got to have, what does that support structure look like for me after this thing's up in operation? Do I want to ultimately expand this? Because during that investigation where we really looked at the process, you're going to uncover all kinds of other stuff, right? Do I have, we were talking about regulatory requirements. Maybe I have to capture journal entry instructions. I have invoice attachments I want. Our friends down in receiving want bill of lading. So, whatever the thing is, can I, do I have the ability to expand into those areas if I want to down the road? Or some people plan it right out of the gate. So next steps, you can check out that ROI calculator. It's on our website. I know that's a ton of information. I'm taking what used to be a 2.5 day sort of class, if you will, that we used to do, preparing people to be able to do their own discovery and so forth related to this type of project into 40 minutes. But hopefully you got some value out of that. This is our approach, so I can tell you that it will work if you take this approach as well. You can contact us to discuss any of this stuff, challenges, or if you have a project, we can customize a plan for you. All kinds of good stuff. So we talked about the business design, which is probably the most critical piece to the puzzle, looking at how your thing works. With all that, I know, again, there's a ton of info, but if there are any questions, you can type them into the box over there. And I know it appears as we're going through this, some of the, you can get into some complication. Well, geez, that's a lot of stuff, right? It's really not as much stuff as you think. It's really goes about when we're training new folks, when they start to get overwhelmed with what do we do? I've always said, stop. How do they do it now? Forget about technology. How does it work today? Right? That's probably the best question you can really ask internally is, how is it working today? And then you're going to go in there and find all those little pieces in your AP automation project. And that's why people start with AP. It's such an easy one to get. It's significant ROI, because you're not keying anything anymore. Yeah, you're not going to get 100% straight through because there's going to be matching issues. That's something that has to go back to purchasing, to contact the vendor, all that kind of stuff. But you can take pretty much all your keying out. So that is a huge one. All right. I want to thank everyone. I was 8 minutes over. Hopefully you got a lot of value. And please, if there's anything I can do to assist, you can give me a call or shoot me an email. And go check out all that good stuff on intellichief.com. Thanks very much, everyone.